Welcome to Courageous Leadership and Officer Safety. My name is Travis Yates. I'm going to be facilitating this webinar today, and it's going to last if you're trying to schedule your day. And I do appreciate everyone's patience. We started at a little after 12:03 Central Standard Time. Why would we schedule it at lunchtime? Well, that's only lunchtime for some of us. And why would we wait until 12:03? Because we had a few firefighters that signed up for the class, and as we all know, they're always late. Who am I kidding? They're actually asleep. Now, some of you don't understand that joke. If you take any of our live seminars, we have a good time with our brothers and sisters that wear red, and we love what they do, but we certainly have a good time with them as they do with us. And so this class, as you may have indicated, is based on a full-day seminar called Courageous Leadership for Law Enforcement. And today we're going to focus on officer safety, and we're very, very fortunate to have our sponsors. Sponsoring this webinar today is Telogis and Below 100. You'll hear a little bit more about them as we go on, but it's really, really an honor to have them involved. I personally have enjoyed working with both companies throughout the years, and we'll talk about the value of what they are. Now, just some sort of house cleaning tips. There is a slight pause for some of you as I transition the slides. It's just the way the internet is. As I see my screen, there's going to be a slight delay in what you see. So as I'm speaking, I may be pausing once in a while just to make sure you're seeing on the screen what I'm seeing. There'll also be a break for questions and answers here pretty quick. I'll show you the screen in a minute where you can submit your questions, and we will pause about midway through to try to answer as many of those as possible. I'm going to send each and every one of you a poll right now. I'm going to actually send you a couple of polls, and I'll send you the first one now, and if everybody will just get back with me on that, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I'll have a second one to send later today. I love the environment that we have here today. We do know it's limited with being online. We're not going to be able to show you much media or videos. The webinars really prohibit that, but I think you're going to get the idea of what we're trying to speak to today. And really what I want to tell you is, first off, I'm nothing special. If you thought you were coming on here to listen to some sort of expert or guru, well, there's plenty of folks that will tell you that's what they are. That's not what we're trying to sell you today. But I'm just like you. I've seen a few good leaders, maybe a couple of great leaders, mostly bad leaders, right? If you had 100 cops in a room and you ask who here thinks that leadership is good, 99 of them would probably say no in law enforcement. We have a track record of some pretty poor leadership. And I've watched law enforcement come to a crossroads sort of in recent years where poor leadership has really been caught up in the myriad of complicated issues that policing today is. You see, in years past, we could maybe get away with some poor leadership, but law enforcement has become so complicated today that poor leadership has really burned us, so to speak. So, in the past, cops could testify in court and everyone believed them no matter what. The press would always need positive stories, and they would seek us out, and if anyone ever questioned you that wore the uniform, they were typically dismissed. And then it all changed. There's really no defining event to that. It was a slow churn. And all of a sudden, you get activist groups that literally commit burglaries into precincts and stay for a month. On our full-day seminar, we tell you that incredible story. We see good police officers being thrown to the wolves, and really gone are the good old days of cops and hundreds of people take an entry-level test, and here we sit. And if you're a little bit like me, you're stinging a little bit, maybe you're a little upset. We love this profession. But here's the good thing. We have really good men and women that work in this profession. And we're going to talk about some of those men and women today, and we're going to talk about how we can, in a sense, get our profession back. Because ultimately, it's the cop that suffers. And that's why we're here today. I think there's a lot of distractions maybe in front of you. I've been on these webinars on the other end. I know that it's sometimes difficult. Understand this. If you've got to go somewhere, we will record this. We want to get this message to you. But the decisions and the weakness that are leaving the carnage of our good men and women behind the uniform have got to be left behind. These good men and women, which is the vast majority of law enforcement, are struggling in their life, they're struggling in their marriage, they have incredible stresses. And at times, we can only thank our leadership for that stress. Bad leadership has manifested itself into placating to the winds of politics, the voices of the few, and we see things like cops who did nothing wrong be fired, or sometimes even worse. And we all have our own examples of that. Our leaders are sometimes unwilling to even stand and defend what the law or policy says. And that damage has been immense. And that's why we do what we do here with Courageous Leadership. It's called the Courageous Leadership Institute. You see the website there on your screen. Don't go to it right now, but you can certainly see a lot of details of what we're trying to do now. And I'll be honest with you, as the founder and CEO of that company, I did not want to do it. There's nothing less I wanted to do than to teach leadership to a bunch of cops, because I've been in the seats listening to Leadership 101 and everything else, and it is absolutely horrible, which maybe is sense on why our leadership is so terrible, is historically our training has been bad. You see, leadership training has been kind of like firearms training from 1972. Anybody know that? I'm not going to call any of you out. I see some familiar names here joining us today. But, firearms training 1972 was slow trigger squeeze, focus on the front side. You've got 10 seconds to fire 3 shots. Yes, you qualified. And then we got in a gunfight and all of it changed, right? And so I've got to give a lot of kudos to our firearms instructors and our tactics instructors, is they brought realism to that training. I think it saved countless lives. And that's what we're trying to do here at courageousleader.org, the Courageous Leadership Institute, is bring realism to leadership. And you'll see kind of the topics we discussed in the full-day seminar, but we're not going to be able to discuss those today. There's maybe one of the series of seminars. We'll see how it goes. But we have work to do, no doubt about it. Now, some of you have questions, or you will have questions. Here's how to send your questions. I've given you 2 ways to send questions, because if you're like me, you're not that technology savvy, and you may not be able to figure out how to send the questions in through the webinar. So we've given you an email address, and you can get on there. I would suggest you in the next 10 or 15 minutes to get those questions to us, and we will do our best near the end of this webinar to answer those, and we're looking forward to that. I mentioned earlier, we do a full-day seminar. This is not a pitch for that, but you need to know where this is based out of. And that was initially based out of Safe TAC training. I've seen some of our clients here joining us today. We're very, very honored to have you, very honored to do this. You can reach us there at safetac.org. We do various classes, and we added a leadership class about 2 years ago, and it went nuts. And so it got so busy, and we saw such an incredible need. We've launched off into its own website, its own purpose, calling it the Courageous Leadership Institute, and you will get a little bit of that material today. Now, this quote that you're seeing on your screen now, I got to be honest with you. When I first saw the quote, I thought it was terrible. I thought to myself, we don't need outsiders coming into our profession and telling us what to do. You know more about your department than anybody, and I absolutely agree with that. And I'm saying that as an outsider with you today. And so I want to just kind of let you digest this quote. I didn't agree with the chief when she said it, but sometimes it's okay, right? I want to come to you as an outsider, but I also want to, be a servant leader to you and acknowledge that you, where you sit in your department, in your seat, knows more about your agency than anybody else. Okay? I'm not going to try to tell you what to do. I'm going to give you just some, a few tidbits here and there. If you can grab a few of them to help you out, that'd be great. If you think it's a waste of your time, we'd love to hear that. But I'm not a big fan of you're outside the zip code, so you're the expert. We are no experts here, but we see things in a different light than many other people are seeing it, and we think it's highly, highly valuable. So you kind of heard a little bit about what courageous leadership is, or as far as where that is founded out of. But what about officer safety? How does that play into courageous leadership? Now, what you're looking on the screen right now is our full day seminar, what we cover. And I'm going to tell you right now, every bit of that you look at has to do with officer safety. Every single bit of it. See, it's not separate. You don't have leadership section over here and then safety over here. But what we have in law enforcement is we have a bunch of so-called leaders by position only, by the way, that don't even care about officer safety, won't even attend the training. You know what I'm talking about. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe I'm talking about you, right? But it's got to be one and the same. You see, the leader's number one goal is not to appease the mayor. It's not even to appease the public. It's to provide you the safest environment possible. End of story. End of story. There's nothing else. There's literally nothing else that their job is to do to provide you a safe environment. I'm going to look now at our first polling question. And it's interesting. We do this in our live class. And it appears that the vast majority of you believe that your leadership is below average or poor. That goes right alongside what we see in our live seminars. It goes right alongside what I said earlier. We got a few goods, a few averages. That's good to go. But over about half of you attending this seminar think your leadership is below average or poor. And like I said, that just goes alongside what we already know. I'm going to send you one of the poll. We'll get to it later today. But when we look at the screen here, we're going to cover some courageous policy and some courageous training to understand the rest of those sections deal with officer safety. And we need to get that in our heads when we talk about leadership. Now, what you see here was said to us in a recent seminar. And we typically go around the room in our smaller environments and we just kind of ask officers where the leadership stands in their department. And, you know, why are they there? What do they hope to accomplish? And we ran across this kid, and he looks up and he says, you know what, I don't even know why I'm here. I'm just a cop. And that really struck a chord with me because that is the problem with law enforcement leadership, by the way. You see, we think because we test well or we wear stripes on our sleeve or because we're a sergeant, captain, major, or whatever, that all of a sudden our IQ increases. Well, let me tell you, scientific facts say every day you're here on this earth, you're getting dumber. By the way, you lose brain cells. But I've got credit for that, different webinar. But you see, that's where we get it wrong. Day one in law enforcement, we have to promote leadership. We've got to make sure our day one officers know that they are a leader, that they do influence somebody. It may not be many. Maybe it's just their family, or maybe it's just their Sunday school class, or maybe it's their buddy at work. But there's an influence there. Every major police scandal dealt with somebody that was there that could have changed that scandal. I call it the fork in the road, right? There's a fork in the road. There's decisions that have to be made. You name the scandal, and there was somebody that could have been a leader and stopped it. And we're seeing way too much people thinking, I'm not going to make that decision. I'm not going to lead. That's somebody else's job. If that's what you believe in, you won't like this day because we're going to hammer that home. This is very important to think and know. And it's really interesting in our full day classes. We get a lot of people that are taking the promotional test, and the sergeant's test, and the chief's test. And I pretty much tell them right off the bat, that's why you're here for the wrong reason. We want you to embrace leadership no matter what you do, whether you intend to promote or not. If every law enforcement officer with your agency had the mindset that I'm a leader, think how much better your agency can be. So we can promote that all we want. You must promote that in your culture. And let me encourage you to do that. This is an example. I actually just saw this the other day, and I just added this in here at the last minute. When I talk about everyone's a leader, as my bio said earlier, I'm a Tulsa police officer. I'm a Tulsa police major. But I'll tell you right now, there are people that are police officers that don't have anybody that work for them that have expressed more leadership skills than some of the upper ranked people, including myself at times, have ever displayed. And here's one example. This officer's name, I'll give him credit. His name's Monty Morris. Every day, Monty shows up at this school and Monty directs traffic. Now, you think to yourself, well, what does that have to do with leadership? Huh? Well, if you watched him more than a few minutes, you'd understand what I'm talking about. Because Monty Morris is influencing not only all the kids in that school, but all the parents in that school. There is no question in my mind that Monty Morris is doing more for that school than 10 school resource officers inside those hallways. Oh, don't get upset at me, school resource officers. You know what I mean. It is absolutely incredible. In fact, Christmas time is coming up, and when Christmas time comes up, the cars are going to be stopping, and Monty's going to be getting so many gifts and presents. Don't get on me about that. These are from school mothers and fathers and kids that want to give Monty their appreciation. And he's going to be getting so many, he's going to be, you know, waving traffic and throwing stuff in his pocket and everything else. I'm talking cars and things like that. The point is, he's embraced that I'm going to leave a legacy. I'm going to be a leader. And you may think that's simple, but think of through the years, Marty's been doing this for over a decade. Think about through the years, these thousands of people he's influenced. Now, I've never had a conversation with Monty about it. You know, he has no idea I'm showing this picture right now. But I'll tell you right now, that's the example that if law enforcement held that example, think of where we would be in this profession. Now, we still need our upper ranked people doing their job. We'll talk about that today. But I want every officer to believe that they can be a leader. And you may have heard this terminology, courageous leadership, before. It's nothing new. And we sort of coined it for what we've been doing because we've seen such weakness and cowardice in law enforcement. But it's really simple why we need it. We need more than just leadership one-on-one, right? This is a sign in a major city where they've gone and they've painted dead cops on all the public signs, right? Here's another one. This is an actual art project submitted to a school. Let me tell you something, that is absolutely sickening. Sickening. Now, this didn't happen overnight. I don't have time to dive into the communication aspect and how we deal with the media and how we don't get our message out and how we let a false narrative run our agency so many times. But this is the end product of that. Okay? That's the end product of that. And it's going to take something more than leadership one-on-one to overcome what some of us are dealing with right now. Some of you, no doubt, aren't having to deal with things like this. I would say if that's you, that's great. Get ahead of it. Start doing the right things now. And we can certainly help you along the way. Now, this photograph you're seeing here, I'm going to tell you right now, we spend quite a bit of time on this study and this photograph in some of our longer seminars. Those women doing that are the most, I can't even express to you how disrespectful, how untrue, and how evil that is. And let me tell you why it's classified as evil, because they know what they're doing is a lie. They're obviously paying homage to Ferguson incident, the hands that don't shoot incident, which, by the way, the Department of Justice said never happened. If you don't believe that, or you waver on that, or there's people in your community that waver on that, read the DOJ study on it. There were literally ex-cons that were saying the officer did all he could, you know, and did everything right with those witnesses, over 100 witnesses. And so they know this. They're not, you know, this isn't some, uninformed citizen. These are people in the media that obviously have read these reports. They know what it says. And this is the shock and awe of what we're dealing with. And if we don't come against that, that's the only message seen. Let me tell you, the reason I put this in there, we talk about this study a lot in our ambush class, the first 3 seconds. This is important for leadership because I believe this study and its results came directly from poor leadership. What does this study by the FBI say? I'm going to show you a few of those excerpts. Well, the most shocking thing that it said was in 2016, 28% of the cop killers said that social and political reasons were the reason they murdered a police officer. This is why that's so shocking. We have never seen that. Most of the time, if you've taken our ambush class, we've explained this to you. People that kill cops because you got in their way. They didn't get up in the morning and they didn't plan out to kill a cop. But here last year, with the highest year in ambushes we saw in 20 years, we had almost 1/3 of the cop killers that said in this FBI report when they interviewed them, I did it for political reasons. Now, what's that called? That's in another country. That's called terrorism. That's a political ideology that causes you to do violence. You better not dare do that here in America, right? We won't get into politics of that, but that is shocking to us because that is difficult to overcome. And let me tell you something. That tells me the false narrative, which we'll explain a little bit later, is working, and it's creating people to cause violence. And if we don't come against that false narrative, well, what's part of that false narrative, Travis? Well, here's one of them. African-American males are their highest risk is being shot by police officers, especially unarmed African-American males. That's a lie. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than that. The research shows that. You can check out the Washington Post deadly force research to show you exactly how limited that is. In fact, almost all of those individuals were attacking a cop or in the commission of a felony. And before people tell me that we should never be able to shoot an unarmed person, I will tell you that 3,000 people died last year alone to unarmed people. So let's quit kidding ourselves. We know that. We've never expressed that typically to the media, and we're letting other people tell our story. And when we let other people tell our story, this is what occurs. Our officers are at risk because people are being ideologued. They are forming agendas based on a false message. Now, some of you may say, well, Travis, we can't control all that. No, we can't. But saying nothing is not the answer. And we say nothing because we're cowards. Our leaders are cowards. We'll get to that a little bit later. So it's going to take some courage to kind of go against the grain here. But I'm going to tell you right now, if we're going to save our profession, it better happen. So that is shocking. Here's a quote directly from the report. Without law enforcement and elected officials providing an alternative narrative, assailants developed a distrust of law enforcement and felt emboldened and justified in using violence against police. This is a report from the FBI, April of 2016, that just got in our hands earlier this year. I won't even go into the fact that why was it hidden from law enforcement for that long. Needless to say, this is shocking because it says that the false narrative is creating a violent atmosphere for law enforcement. This has to stop. It has to stop. And it stops right here, right now, with the information we're hopefully be able to give you to be able to combat that. Let's take a look at our polls here on training. We haven't gotten to training yet, but I really like what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing the vast majority of you are getting 21 or more hours in training a year. Now you may go, hey, that's not very many. Well, it may not be, but there are many people that don't. I'm gonna go ahead and send you the results of this poll so you can take a look at it. Pretty interesting stuff. I love the fact we're getting 81 plus hours, 22%. We need more, and it needs to be the right training, and hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about that later today. So if I'm going to tell you this terminology, courageous leadership, I better tell you what courage is, right? And really in the context of what we're talking about, that's not it. That's kind of the context from your Webster's Dictionary. The quality of mind or spirit that enables a person to face difficulty. I think you understood this, but this is really what we think it is right here. It's in quotes. We actually quoted this, but I went and looked this quote up. I just typed it in, and there's obviously been a handful of people that have said the same exact things. I don't know where the quote originates, but it's the willingness to act despite fear. Courage is the willingness to act despite fear. It means that many of us, in fact, I think it's our natural inclination, is to, when we fear loss of status or fear that people won't be pleased with us, that we make alternative decisions. And that is really the road that law enforcement's been walking down all these years, for recent years especially, is we back down to the loudest in the group. Maybe we back down to the most vocal. We back down to the media. And we're not just standing up and being honest and truthful. Now, let me tell you something. If you're truthful, you can still get in trouble. I can guarantee you that. But we've got to start being truthful with it. And I tell chiefs, when we do seminars for chiefs a lot, and I'll be honest with you, I tell chiefs and sheriffs, do not be a chief or sheriff unless you're financially secure to walk away tomorrow. And that shocks some of them, but here's why. Because there's going to come a fork in the road, a decision that you have to make where the right decision could get you fired. We see it all the time. And if you're not willing to make the right decision, don't do the job. End of story. End of story. Don't do the job. But that's not what we see. We often see people protecting themselves. We call it the art of self-preservation in our full-day seminars. We protect ourselves at everyone else's cost. And let me tell you something. You listening to me, you're not the hero. I don't care what your rank is. You're not the hero. Your job is to make everybody else the hero. That's your job. We call it servant leadership. And you've heard that terminology, but that is essentially what it is. I want you to make everybody else the hero. And to start off to do it, we have to stand up for people, even if it means a loss of status. That is not easy. That's a lot harder than me just saying it. But it's just like officer safety and the what-if scenarios and our scenario-based training. We ought to be doing scenario-based training when it comes to leadership. What will you do when they come for you? What will you do when they call your officer out for doing something wrong when he didn't, right? Will you stand up or will you sit down? and we've seen far too many set down. I just like this quote. It's from Bruce Lee. I liked it for that reason alone, but I thought it was pretty good. I thought it made sense. Acting despite fear. And I say this a lot. We have no issues running into a dark alley with a man with a gun. Man, we do that every day. We kind of like doing that, to be honest with you. But when it comes to making leadership decisions, standing up for the right reasons, well, we sometimes fail. And I got to be honest with you. I think we all know, and we can all think of the big events that every department out there probably can improve in that area. So when I talk about weak leaders, cowardly leaders, I'm going to get to some good stuff in a minute. I want to be down and out the entire webinar here, but what are our leaders typically afraid of? What are you possibly afraid of other than being on YouTube, right? I love that little slide. What's the goal of the day? Don't end up on YouTube. Well, I tell people, stop having that be your goal, because you can do everything right and end up on YouTube, right? So stop it. We're all going to be on YouTube. That's okay. The days of ignoring that are over with. But here is just some of the things that we're afraid of. Let me tell you, first off, that top left picture, that is Jose Lopez. He's the former police chief in Durham, North Carolina. He is not a cowardly leader. He is a courageous leader, and he doesn't have a job because of his courage. So when I say be secure and make the right decision no matter what, he's a man that has lived that. And he made the right decisions. He stood up to people when he needed to for his officers. He paid for it with his job, but I tell you, he left a mark on that department and left a legacy that everyone should be proud of. So that's who that is. And of course, those are just other random pictures there. Are we scared of the mayor, our boss? Are we scared of getting called by the way, that one picture, racist? Many of us are just scared of getting called the worst word you could ever be called, racist, right? And I tell people this, stop being scared of it. You're going to get called that. No matter what your race is. This isn't a white or black thing. You're going to get called that no matter what. Because there is a small segment of people of all races that use that, right? And law enforcement as an institution isn't even close to being racist. Now, it's hard to get into that to prove that to you in this just a short hour, but I'll just give you a quick tip of what we talk about in our full-day seminars. As long as we let citizens that know nothing about law enforcement tell us we're racist based on our data, i.e. traffic stops, arrest data, use of force data, and compare that data to the United States Census, they will continue saying we're racist. Why is that? Because policing does not operate along the census lines, just like healthcare doesn't, and education doesn't, and unemployment doesn't, right? Nothing does. Banking doesn't. You know, there may be one profession that may be more scared than us, which is the banking profession. If you know any bankers, they are scared silly, and they have so many federal regulations because of these similar issues. And how do they overcome it? They overcome it with data and true narrative, and we've got to do the same thing. Milwaukee's a great example of that. Milwaukee was recently sued by the ACLU for disproportional policing. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they have around 35% African Americans in their city. I believe their arrests were around 70% African Americans. That's going to be off a percentage or two. I can send you that direct link after the webinar if you reach out to us. And so obviously that was off kilter. Their arrests were not according to their census, and the ACLU sued them. And I've got to applaud Chief Flynn. We were up in Milwaukee with this seminar. Chief Flynn wasn't there, but some of his officers were there. And he came out and he did exactly what we advocate in our seminar. He came out and he gave the data, but he gave all the data. He said, hey, you want to talk data? Here's the data of the race and demographics of who are victims in this city, who are the suspects named by those victims, and who is committing crime, especially crime of violence. And of course, it matched almost exactly with the work that the Milwaukee Police Department was doing. And his quote was, does the community expect me to deploy my officers to the safest neighborhood in the city and have even policing in all neighborhoods? He said, of course not. People that live in violent neighborhoods demand professional and effective policing. And he's exactly right. And let me tell you what it did for him. I think it kind of worked. We haven't heard a peep from the ACLU since, but the ACLU is not going to give that up. They're going to go to your city and my city and other cities, right? And they're going to do the same thing. They're going to compare your activity to the census. Now, I'm not saying there's not individual bad cops. Of course there are. There's individual bad everybody. But as an institution in law enforcement, you are the most professional, you're the most trained, and you're the most unbiased group of anybody. You know, people say, oh, well, look at this incident, that incident. We wear body cameras 24 hours a day, literally. And you can name the incidents on one hand. That alone tells me we're doing a pretty good job, and you're doing a pretty good job. But nobody's saying this, right? Nobody's standing up for our profession. And so the data is actually on our side. The problem is we're not releasing all the data. And so they're going to call us names no matter what. People said, Travis, is this a new phenomenon? Heck, no, it's not a new phenomenon. Before the internet, we were getting called names, right? But now, because of social media and the internet, the very few people seem much more vocal. I'm going to prove to you a little bit later that they are such the few, and you have more support than ever, which is really, really cool. So point is, we got to stop being scared. We just have to stop being scared. It's that simple. Do the right thing. And let me tell you, we've seen this time and time again. I'm going to give you a recent example. We just wrote an article on our courageousleader.org website of the University of Tennessee. If you follow sports, because you can take weak leaders, they're everywhere, right? They're really at the university level. Political correctness runs them up. Sometimes at the university level. We have some university police listen to us, and they will testify to that. I guarantee you. But they named a Schiano as their head coach, I guess, last weekend. And Schiano is a great coach. He's at Ohio State now. He's defensive coach. He was before that. He was at Rutgers, I believe. A winner everywhere he's going. Great respect for him all over the game. That's why they named him the coach. Well, Schiano was a graduate assistant at Penn State under Paterno. Of course, we all know about the sex scandal there at Penn State. He's a graduate assistant. There's no evidence whatsoever he knew anything about it. And I'm telling you from experience, graduate assistants don't know anything. But there was a little bit of internet chatter and some upset people, and the AD at University of Tennessee quickly reversed fortunes, and Schiano was said he wasn't going to get the job now. And of course, look at Schiano. This guy did nothing wrong. All of a sudden, when you type his name in the internet, he's now linked to Joe Paterno and a sex scandal, right? He had nothing to do with it. All because one AD, one leader of this athletic program, could stand up and just tell the truth. But he's a great coach, and he was not linked to it. And he listened to the small vocal minority. And let me tell you something. We say this a lot. And Stacey Tell, who kind of pitched the story to us for the article, he said it when it happened. He goes, that athletic director is not going to have this job much longer. I said, really? He said, yeah. And guess what? He lost his job a week later because weak leaders are exposed. And you may be able to get away with it for a while, but eventually, it's just not going to happen. And so we feel very confident that in the long run, standing up, being encouraged, doing the right thing will absolutely benefit you in the long run. Think of it this way. If you listen to the vocal few, I call them the bullies, right? Every town's got one. That guy that's screaming and yelling about cops or this and that, he couldn't even qualify to be a policeman in most instances, right? But, everybody's got this loud-mouth guy or whatever. Well, guess what? If you let a bully punch you in the mouth and you don't do anything back, what do? They punch back harder, and they just keep punching back. I'm not saying go punch people. Let me repeat that. I'm not saying to go punch people. What I'm saying is you stand up to people and you be truthful. And we are not doing that in law enforcement. It's an absolute shame. And if you're wondering if this webinar is going to take 8 hours, yeah, we're on the road for that. I'm going to tighten it up here a little bit. We're going to be 60 to 90 minutes, and we're not going to go past that. But as you can tell, we get pretty wound up. And so if you can make it to an on-ground full-day class, I think it would benefit you. We'll keep going here. So these are questions we like to ask everybody that is, sort of exposed to what we are advocating here at the Courageous Leadership Institute. What do you refuse to compromise? What do you stand for? What's not up for sale or discussion, and which hill will you die on? You see, we don't treat leadership like we do officer survival, officer safety. We constantly train in officer survival, officer safety. What would you do if this happened? Right? We constantly train. In leadership, we just wait till some bad stuff happens, and then we try to figure it out. That's not the right approach, right? The famous saying is, we wait till some bad stuff happens. We have to say different words and stuff. We wait for some bad stuff to happen, and then we make a quick policy, we do some quick training. We're totally reactive to the situation. And what we try to advocate is to be proactive. And maybe you're sitting there at the department and nothing bad's happened. Look around you. Get ready. Start being proactive, right? That's what makes perfect sense. But let me tell you the answer to this question. There's only one answer. The answer to this question on what we should all agree on: what will you not compromise? What will you stand up for? What's not up for sale or discussion? And what hill will you die on? Is officer safety. End of story. Right? That's it. You will not compromise on that. And as we said earlier, officer safety includes a myriad of issues. And we're going to talk about policy and training today. Now, before we get to that officer safety discussion and policy and training, I've got to tell you about a man that I think embodies what we're talking about today. If you've been in our classes, we talk about him, and I want to mention it briefly today. But his name is Admiral Rickover. And when I say courageous leadership and officer safety, he was, of course, a leader in the United States Navy. And those of you, I know we have some military veterans joining us today, thank you for what you do. And let me get off course just a little bit. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Why am I thanking you? Because nobody on September 12th, 2001, woke up and said, well, that stuff's not going to happen ever again. No, we all woke up and said, it's here. The enemy is among us. And then we, good men and women, took the fight to them, and the rest is history, so to speak. We've had some small lone wolf events here in America, but I think I can thank you for my safety and my family's safety and this country's safety for the work you represent and the work you stand for. So thank you for that. And Rickover was an amazing, amazing leader. He was 62 years in the Navy. I don't even know how you do that, to be honest with you. I mean, he must have had something on somebody, right? Those of you in the military can attest to that. But in 51 years, he made 4-star admiral. Can you imagine that? Hey, I got 50 years on the department. I just made lieutenant. What in the world is that about? Needless to say, I would encourage you to read some of his biographies, because he was a man that took leadership very seriously and took officer safety very seriously. That your slide tells you that he had a perfect safety record. I got to be honest with you, that's really difficult to believe, those of you that understand risk management. But I'll tell you what, he has proven it, and we want to honor him today. And he has what he deemed as Rickover's rules. And I want to kind of tell you what his rules were, and I think we can apply many of those to law enforcement, because you must have a rising standard of quality over time and well beyond what is required by any minimum standard. Well, how many times in law enforcement do we hear those words? What's the minimum standard? If I hear that again, I'm going to explode. What's the standard for greatness? Well, it's not the minimum standard. And most states in this country require anywhere from 20 to 30 hours a year to keep your certification. Let me tell you something. We're the only profession that requires that less. You talk to beauticians, you talk to bankers, you name it, they're going to typically getting more hours than that. So I think we've got to be better than the minimum standard, no question about it. People running complex systems should be highly capable. You see, we tend to forget how complex our job is. When I broke into law enforcement 24 years ago, the technology in my car was a notebook with a suction cup on the window. Some of you know what I'm talking about. I love that thing, right? You got your calls on there. Now it's like a spaceship inside these cars. And we're demanding more from our officers. On my gun belt 24 years ago, I had an axe and a gun. I think we just got OC spray. So yeah, we had 3 tools at our disposal. Look on the gun belts now, right? And so we're demanding more, we're asking more, and we've got to hire and we've got to ensure that people are able to do a very complex job. Supervisors must be supervisors. The slide actually says supervisors have to face bad news when it comes and take problems to a level high enough to fix those problems. That's just doing your job. We've got to do that. We've got to be there. I said earlier that every scandal that we can think of in law enforcement, your department, my department, either had an officer or a supervisor that didn't rise up and do the right thing. Courageous to do it, sometimes going against the grain, but think of the trouble that you can avoid. You must have a healthy respect for the dangers and risks of your particular job. That's just basic risk management 101. I dare to say most of us don't have risk management programs in your agencies. I would highly recommend it. And if you need some kind of a direction towards that, shout at me after this webinar. I'll give you my contact information. But this is really important. We kind of make fun of Walmart. When you go into Walmart, you see that little sign that says, we haven't had an accident, and it'll be a little flip thing. It'll say 25 days, 30 days. I've seen some high ones, by the way. I've seen a couple hundred days. I don't know what the heck is that about. Yeah, it's simple, but guess what it's doing? Every day an employee that walks by, they're reminded to think about those safety principles. You see, there's no new ways for us to get hurt. There's no new ways for us to die. There's no new ways for us to get sued. We've figured them all out in law enforcement, haven't we? We do the same thing each and every year. The same thing. We're just not figuring it out. That's, by the way, that's the definition of insanity. You do the same thing every year, and you expect a different result. It's time to start changing our mindsets, right? And hopefully we'll get into Blow 100 in a minute and kind of explain to you what they're trying to talk about. Training must also be constant and rigorous, is what Rickover said. Yes, it should be. Obviously, and I'll be honest with you, it's got to be more than a webinar, right? Hopefully it's got to be more than this. It's got to be other things. But we've got to get into this mindset and focus. I've heard more excuses than anyone can think of. I've been doing training around the country for the last 15 years. And I'll tell you right now, we have some places that just the leaders don't care about their officers. They're not providing anything. We get officers who have to spend their own money to come to training. We don't want to take an officer's money. I'll take a department's money all day long, every day, but I don't want to take an individual's money. It's just sickening to me to think that we're not providing the proper resources, tools, and training. We got to get past that. If a leader doesn't do that, it doesn't matter what else they do. It simply doesn't matter. And the way I see it, if you're responsible for that, you've got to lay your head on the pillow. You got to lay your head on the pillow at night. And if you get a phone call, and God forbid something tragic has happened, are you going to be able to answer those questions? Did I do everything I could possibly do to provide my officers with the safest environment possible? If you can't answer yes to that, get out of this business. Oh, Travis, you're being harsh. Yeah, you damn right I'm being harsh, because I'm tired of people playing games with the lives of men and women that wear this badge. And so we've got to get serious about it, and the time is now to get serious about it. One more rule: organization members must have the ability and willingness to learn from the mistakes of the past. We do a terrible job at this. Terrible job at this. As I said earlier, there's no new ways for us to get hurt or killed. We're doing the same thing every year. The fact alone that half of us die behind the wheel of a car, by the way, the leading cause of death is vehicle related, and that half of us are dying without a seatbelt tells me that we're not learning from any mistakes. There should have been one police officer in the history of policing that died not wearing a seatbelt. And we should have all said, what in the hell is that, right? We're never going to do that again. We're never going to repeat the mistakes of the past. But then what do? We continue and continue and continue. And that's just got to stop. Where does it stop? Leadership. If you don't believe me, check out the story of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department with their sheriff. I can give you that story offline, but he essentially got involved in this issue, did some things as a leader, wasn't real popular, but he was the courageous one that says this is going to stop. I'm never going to bury another cop this way. And guess what? He did that in 2009. They've never buried another cop to driving related issues in the aspects that he was dealing with, i.e. speed seatbelts. They've had some other tragedies there, as we well know. But that issue that was killing his officers, he killed 3 of his officers in a 6-month period. He said, that's it. His name's Doug Gillespie. His name. Sorry, I shorted out there for a minute. I've talked with Doug several times, and I forgot his name. But Doug is now retired, and I hopefully when he lays his head on the pillow at night, he knows that he did everything he could to provide his officers a safe environment. And I know he did at the end of his career, because we had numerous conversations with him about that, and he was doing a lot of things, and it paid off, and it paid off well. And so we've got to think about that. So how is all of this officer safety achieved? Are you still with me? We're going to take a quick break in a minute for questions and answers. Stay with me on it. How are we going to be able to achieve this officer safety? I already showed it to you. Now, the ones that are in color are the ones we're going to talk about today. But all these matter when it comes to officer safety. If your policies aren't right, you're going to be unsafe. If you don't have competent cops, you're going to be unsafe. If you're not dealing with your community appropriately, you're going to be unsafe. If you're not training right, you will be unsafe. If you don't recruit the right people, you could potentially be unsafe. See, the actions of one dictate the actions of all. You get one cop that's not doing things safely, guess what? It puts everybody else at risk. And if you're not communicating and giving the true narrative, the true facts, getting your message out to the public, then we see what we saw last year, which is almost 1/3 of the people that killed a cop said they did it because of political ideology and a false narrative. By the way, most of you have never heard that before. Most of you have never heard of that report. How wrong is that, right? How wrong is that? I'm going to tell you what I'm going to put the blame on. Probably your leadership, because that has got to be pushed down to every single officer, because that changes the game in policing. It's no more that I'm going to stop a car and get in someone's way, or somebody's going to be a domestic and do us harm, which all that happens. Now it's just these dudes that just walk out of their house and want to kill a cop for no rhyme or reason other than they saw a CNN report. Okay, I'm picking on CNN. It could have been anybody's report, but probably CNN, right? Okay, I guess we'll see. Oh, we still got a few of you on here, so you're still listening to me. Now let's talk about policy briefly. Get your questions into me if you haven't already. I'm going to, in fact, I'm going to go offline for about 30 seconds. I'm going to check the questions, and so I'm ready for them. But we're about to dive into policy. I hope you're still with me because we got a lot of good stuff to go. Okay, how do we deal with policy? Most of you maybe be shaking your head thinking, what does police policy have to do with safety? I'll tell you, it has everything to do with safety, because if we don't develop policy right and we put out inappropriate policies, we put out policies outside the scope of case law or outside the scope of the Supreme Court, outside the scope of basic safety practices, we could be in trouble. And we've got to develop policies appropriately, develop them with safety in mind. And I don't care, as the kind of funny cartoon says, I don't care what anybody else says. You know, I do find it odd that many people that are demanding changes in police policy or demanding certain things from law enforcement literally don't know anything about law enforcement. You find that odd? I mean, who else lets that happen, right? Can you imagine the medical profession saying, you know what we need here? We need a group of 12 citizens that aren't doctors that come in and tell us how to be doctors. Yeah, that's not going to happen, right? Because that's the stupidest thing you ever heard of. And by the way, doctors have their own host of issues. Doctors kill, on average, about 250,000 people a year. Before you Google it, okay, let me explain it to you. There's some independent groups that say doctors kill about 800,000 people a year. And the doctors say, we don't agree with that number, but we've done our own study and we say we kill 250,000 people a year. Okay. In contrast, law enforcement has shot and killed about 980 people on average for the last several years. The vast majority of them have been violent attacks against law enforcement and other people. So justified deadly force. Now, when I say 250,000, that's not justified. Those are called medical mistakes in the doctor world, medical mistakes. Yeah, okay. They are probably medical mistakes, but it's funny how the grace is extended to doctors. Because when's the last time somebody said, you know, that policeman, that doesn't look good, but maybe it's just a mistake, or maybe it's just stress-induced mistake. No, it's always like throw them in jail immediately, it's a crime, yada, yada, yada. Now, I'm not dismissing the fact that there have been crimes committed by police officers. That'd be ridiculous to say. But let's not act like it's very many, because we can all think of the few that has happened there, right? And don't tell me, well, that's because there's something inherently wrong with the system. That's ridiculous. Okay, it simply is. By the way, I'm gonna get off tangent here. That's why we should release more body camera footage and dash cam footage than people ask for. What do I mean by that? Well, think about the footage we release. What footage do we release in law enforcement? We wait for the news media to ask us and do an open res request to submit the video. No. So does the media come and ask for your videos that are showing us do good things? No, they're always asking for videos, typically showing us do things that are seen as controversial or wrong. Now, many times it's not wrong, it's just perceived as wrong, and we're not doing a good job explaining it. So we release those videos. So when you go online to look at police videos, what videos are you seeing? You're only seeing the ones that are deemed controversial, which is why your department should have a process to routinely release many videos to show the public an accurate depiction of what you're doing. Now, that's off target, what I need to talk about today. But we've got to get in that habit. Oh, I've heard all these excuses. Oh, we don't have the resources. Oh, we don't have the... Stop it. Look what has happened in law enforcement. It's time we wake up. And when it comes to policy, we do not develop policy based on what a few loudmouths say. They don't know anything about law enforcement. Okay? That's not how we do it. How do we say we do it? This is how we advocate doing it with the Courageous Leadership Institute. We want expert input. That could be in your department and outside your department. But let me tell you, most of your departments have your experts. You have your experts in use of force. You have your experts in defensive tactics. You have your experts in law. You have experts in custody. You have your own experts. I'm amazed at how often we are making decisions outside the scope of the people in your department that know more about the decision than anything else. If you're a chief or sheriff out there, please stop making these policy decisions in a bubble where you're not asking your experts. So we got to ask our experts. We also need to ask your entire agency. Some of the smartest people you have are people inside your agency. I love what my police department does, the Tulsa Police Department. We release all policies pre-release. We do the draft of the policy, then we put the policy out for every single person to make a comment on. And we get some of the best results from that because we're tapping into our entire department. Many of them are experts in that policy. And here's a third one that most of us do not do, and I highly recommend it: community input. Why should we do community input on the front end of a policy? Because when does the community typically give input into a policy? When something goes wrong and then they attack the policy, right? Now, you may be the best department out there, but something's going to go wrong. That's just the nature of our business. Something's going to go wrong to somebody. And so you have to be prepared for that. And so I want to get the community involved on the front end. I typically call that a policing plan. We actually do those 4 agencies at the Courageous Leadership Institute. You can contact us if you have questions about that. But we literally develop a policing plan that gives the DNA makeup of your department and of how you can make decisions and your policies and everything. And then when someone wants to complain later, you can simply say, where were you? Where were you when we developed the policy, right? Where were you at? Because people don't tend to care until there's an agenda behind it. And so I believe if you implement all 3 of these, your policy is not only going to be very sound, it's going to be very appropriate and safe for your officers. Now, obviously, there's much more to this than what I just said. I just can't get to everything in the short time span that we have, but I think that's very, very important. I'm only going to talk about one policy today, and it's probably one of the most vital policies for your agency. That is your use of force policy. We're seeing a trend, a troubling trend, where law enforcement agencies are taking their use of force policy and they're going outside the Supreme Court. They're going outside case law, and they're listening to think tanks, groups, citizens, activists, you name it, that are telling them what to put in their use of force policy. That has nothing to do with the law. Once again, no one else in the world would ever do this. A doctor is never going to listen to somebody that's knowing about doctors on a surgical procedure, right? So why in the world would we listen to somebody that doesn't know a lot about law enforcement or couldn't even qualify to be a law enforcement officer, which is oftentimes the case, we know. Why would we listen to them and to make decisions that could put our officers' lives at risk? And I'm going to give you one quick example. The Chicago Police Department, in October of last year, there was a new policy change, and it's centered around the sanctity of life, which I have literally no problem with. We can't get into the issues and the language that needs to be in there when you have that, because of course we have sanctity of life. I laugh when people sort of go, well, do you believe in the sanctity of life? Of course. Sometimes law enforcement's the only ones that believe in the sanctity of life, right? I mean, who's going into neighborhoods and trying to stop violence, and who's doing medical aid? Who's doing all this stuff? Well, it's law enforcement. It's your first responders. So I kind of chuckle when people sort of attack us on that. But sometimes people think they got to put it in a policy, which I don't mind. That's not case law. That's not Supreme Court language. It doesn't bother me. If it makes people feel good, then write it down, right? But I think that should be a really good philosophy. But here's some of the other proposed changes that really should be concerning. Use of force, Chicago Police Department. This was the policy that was put up for potential to be used last year. And it says, while the legal standard remains that an officer's use of force must be objectively reasonable, and stop right there. Yes, that's the legal standard. Stop right there. That's the legal standard. They listened to what was in their policy. The new department policy is more demanding than the law requires. Members are now expected to use the least amount of force necessary. Now, I'm going to stop right there and go to the next slide, but who is providing the definition of the least amount of force necessary? Because we know the Graham v. Connor talks about that officers will only be judged based on what they know at the time and the fact that they are involved in a critical incident with life and death decisions, with having to make really quick decisions. So, i.e., you can't judge a police officer sitting on your couch watching it on TV and stopping the video, right? So my question is, when you put this in policy, who is making that decision what the least amount of force is? Because we all know that context is everything. We all know that sometimes you can watch a video, and sometimes policy can be absolutely legal, but it can also look very brutal. And so that should be concerning. So that's the first thing that I have on that one. Let's go to the next section of this proposed policy. The use of deadly force is only authorized to prevent an immediate threat of death or great bodily harm posed to officers or a person. Additionally, officers may only draw and display their firearms. And by the way, let me just talk about there. Whenever you put only, that's going to be a catch-22. And by the way, we're now policing when you can pull your gun or not, and who is making those decisions on whether the officer felt safe or not. Let me tell you what the law says. The law says the officer gets to make that decision because they're in the situation, they're in the environment. And so I wasn't a fan of that. That's concerning. They've got de-escalation in their policy. I don't mind de-escalation. In fact, de-escalation is good. I really love these buzzwords, de-escalation, de-escalation. Law enforcement's been teaching de-escalation for decades, right? There's never a year gone by that I haven't been exposed to de-escalation. That's what we do. Go back all the way to the verbal judo days before that. We de-escalate. If we didn't de-escalate, trust me, there would be a different landscape out there. You're looking at an environment right now in law enforcement where we are using less force and less deadly force than ever a time in history. Now, I can't prove it to you with data, unfortunately, because we've done a really poor job of tracking that data. But that data is now leveled off. Washington Post has been tracking it. It's leveled off. People are like, why come it's not getting lower? Maybe it's because we're doing things right. But we can't prove that because anybody that's been in law enforcement more than 20, 30 years knows that first off, the advent of less lethal munitions and tasers, that has been a godsend for us because we've used those in situations where in the past our only tool may have been a deadly force situation. Now, let me be very clear about this. We do not advocate the use of less lethal weapons in deadly force situations. We're seeing a trend of that, by the way, which is absolutely nuts. And we've got an article on Law Officer called We Lied to Them. I would go to the front page of lawofficer.com and you get a chance to check that article out under editorial because we basically did lie to law enforcement. We gave them these tasers, we told them it was a great tool, and law enforcement said, well, what if it's deadly force? Well, no, you don't use a taser for that. You use a weapon, of course. And then what happens now? Every time we're in a deadly force situation, what is the first question asked? Why didn't you use a taser? Well, because a taser is not for a deadly force situation. But de-escalation is nothing new. But Chicago believes they got to put it in a policy. And here's what's concerning. You see it there in red. You will not resort to force unless all other reasonable alternatives have been exhausted. What does that mean? Who is making the decision of that? And this was really going down the road to being the policy of the Chicago Police Department, a policy that was a higher standard of grant, a policy that would place their officers, I believe, in harm's way, because there's a lot of language in there that is unknown, to be honest with you. And there are a lot of departments that have actually done this type of policy. Shame on them. One of the things that was in policy was you can never shoot at a moving car. All these big cities were doing that in policy, which I would say at the time, what are you talking about? In 2010, Al-Qaeda was publicizing in their magazine website to use their cars as weapons around the world. And you're telling your officers you can never shoot at a moving car no matter what. Let me tell you something. That's ridiculous. And now we know it is. And now we've seen departments like LAPD and NYPD have had to go back in, modify their policy to give some exceptions to that. And so we sort of knee-jerk reaction. We make these decisions not based on law, not based on safety, but based on emotion. And it's going to be courageous to overturn that, but we have to because we see things like this. And let me tell you something. We obviously as my job with Law Officer Magazine dictates, I follow the news pretty closely. That happens a lot. That's just one article. But we see this happen a lot, officers being hurt or worse because of policy, because of tactics, because of other things. Let me go back to Chicago for you, because I'm proud to say, and I'm very excited to say, that's kind of an overword, excited, right? I don't think I'm getting excited about it. But shortly after that policy, some of you remember the video, and I said earlier, I can't play the video for you on the webinar. I'll send it to you if you're interested. But if you go to YouTube and you Google Chicago police officer almost beaten to death, you saw the unarmed guy on PCP that was beating a female officer, slamming her head in the concrete. Pretty much would have killed her if it wasn't for a bunch of other officers that arrived on that scene. Taser wasn't working, nothing was working. An unarmed person, okay? When the commissioner visited her in the hospital that night, she was critical condition. He asked her, why did you, because he'd seen the video, he said, why did you not kill her? Now let me tell you something. Think about this. Just 5 months earlier, that policy language was being proposed, and it was coming out. It may have come out. It was kind of hard to follow because Chicago is a great city. There's a citizen review board that has to approve the policy. Anyway, it's crazy, right? She said, I didn't want to shoot an unarmed man and put the city and the department of my family through hell. And he walked out of that hospital room, from what I'm told, and said, we're going to reverse that use of force policy. And my policy is going to say what the Supreme Court says. And there it is. The force must be objectively reasonable. Now, he actually has a really good policy. I'll be glad to send you the link to it after the webinar. I'm going to show you that policy was implemented in September, just a couple of months ago. Now, their union has filed a grievance on that policy. So I don't believe they've gotten an injunction on that. I believe it's a good standing policy right now. They filed an injunction because they weren't involved in the policy development, which I said earlier, they need to be. We need to have everybody involved in the department involved in the policy, including our unions, because we just get involved in the front end. That way in the back end, we don't get these issues. But we called him courageous when he rolled it back, because I guarantee you he took some heat for that. Here's what, straight from the policy, what it says. And you'll recognize this terminology because it comes straight from the United States Supreme Court. The main issue in evaluating use of force is whether the amount of force used by the officer was objectively reasonable in light of the totality of circumstances. Reasonableness is not capable, and I'm not going to read it and insult you there, but I really, really like what they've done. They've made a policy that makes sense. It's according to the Supreme Court. It's not really outside that. Now, they still, in that policy, when you read it all, they still mention sanctity of life. They still mention de-escalation, but it's not in the context of what I read to you earlier. It's a very common sense approach. So there are ways of doing that. And so thankfully that officer didn't die. Thankfully that officer didn't die. But unfortunately, we have bad policies all over the place, and we've got to stop this. Why do we not stand up on the heels of the United States Supreme Court and say this is the law? You see, nobody else does what we do. Can you imagine another Supreme Court decision? Let me just, let's get controversial with you. It's not really controversial. What's the law? Gay marriage. We just had the big Supreme Court case yesterday with the baker in Colorado. Well, gay marriage is legal in all 50 states. Supreme Court said so. Who in the world would go, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think Supreme Court, I don't believe the Supreme Court. We're going to make our law stricter than that. I'm not going to comply with that. Well, hell would rain upon that person, right? Because it's the Supreme Court. It's the law of the land. So why in law enforcement do we go, yeah, it's okay, we'll do this, we'll do that? Stop it. The United States Supreme Court is your judge. And we need to just stand up to that and quit laying down to that. Now, can we do some things like Chicago did in some other places to make our policy even better? Yeah, but we don't need to go outside Graham v. Connor, which is, of course, the law that I'm talking about, Graham v. Connor. Now, the interesting thing about Graham v. Connor is in recent years, this case has been attacked. People have questioned the use of force in law enforcement. And we as leaders have really been cowardly and not stood up and said, listen, this thing has been in effect since 1989. Seriously. And there have been multiple attacks and cases that come against Graham v. Connor to alter it, and it's not altered. In fact, the latest case, I can't go into it, this is just for time purposes, was out of LA County, and it was a 9-0 decision to uphold Graham v. Connor. And the court, I think today, was probably pretty much a split court, probably a 5-4 court, as it's been for a long time. And they went 9-0 Graham v. Connor. So we need to stop shying away. We need to stop being scared of what people think or say. This case is our Bible, so to speak, and we need to adhere to it. You'll see on the screen what it says. You can look this up later. By the way, if you don't have this language in your policy, you're making a mistake. And if you don't train your officers in this, you're making a mistake. And some of you are thinking, Travis, you're well over an hour. Yeah, I may never stop talking because we're having a good time. You're still here, so we're going to keep talking. We're going to answer your questions here in a minute. Here's what Graham v. Connor says. It replies to the Fourth Amendment, and here's what I love about it. It says that an officer's actions must be objectively reasonable. You recognize that in Chicago's policy, right? In light of the facts and circumstances confronting them. That means they can't judge you based on what you find out later. If the guy had a toy gun, or the guy was a pastor, or just a good college-educated young man trying to get his life right, none of that matters. You are judged based on what you are confronted at the time. It also says you must be just and effective of a reasonable officer. Not about it. It didn't say reasonable citizen. It didn't say reasonable activist. It didn't say a reasonable mayor. It said what? A reasonable officer. Someone trained to do what you do. That's what you're judged on. It also goes on to say that you're judged based on the fact that you're having to make, there's that word, split-second decisions. I love it, and we need to embrace it. And I'm amazed at the people that know anything about it. I've got a quick story for you because it's a cool story. I've commanded different areas of my agency. I've been very, very blessed and had a really great career. But I've befriended, maybe you would call them an activist or reformers or whatever, but they're kind of these men and women that they're always on Facebook and they're always calling out police. I mean, typically ignoring other major issues in communities, but it's always the police, right? Well, I'm kind of friends with one of them. I don't know if I've seen him Christmas card, but we've had lunch, we've had dinner, we have a good debate. He's not a real emotional guy, so we can have good, healthy debates. So I respect that. And now he's not a policeman. In fact, he's an ex-con. I mean, isn't that oftentimes the case, right? I mean, the ex-cons are all of a sudden the ones that want to fix law enforcement. Okay, kind of like the sick people want to go in and fix doctors, whatever. I don't know. I'm not going to get into it. I probably said too much that I need to say, but he was on Facebook one day and he's ranting or raving about something. And so I texted him, and I said, listen, I said, you want to go to law school, right? Yeah. Because a lot of these cats trying to go to law school. I said, well, I'm going to send you a court case and get your thoughts on it. So I sent him Graham v. Connor. So here's a guy that has spent the last few years just banging on police every chance he get, whether he knows the story or not. I sent him the case law on use of force. You know what he says back? That's interesting. That's his quote. I thought to myself, that's interesting. I go, brother, that's the law. Everything you're talking about, that's what it's judged on. That. Now, the reason he's got to dismiss that, the reason the media has to dismiss that is because they lose. They lose almost every argument when you bring the law into it. That's why we got to bring emotions and false stories and things like that. So I then asked him to do me a favor. Would you post it on your social media accounts? Because, he's got a following of people that sort of agree with him. He posted on social media accounts and nobody commented, which tells me people don't really want to talk about truth or facts because it really does sort of upset the apple cart. One quick shout out to Police Chief Tim Barfield there in Ohio. Really proud of him. Really great example of a courageous leader. I told you I was going to give you some good stories today. The governor of Ohio, Kasich, his name, Kasich. I don't want to give Kasich too much credit here, but he decided, I think it was after Tamir Rice incident in Cleveland, that he was going to develop a use of force policy and mandate every department in Ohio has to comply with this use of force policy. Well, I don't even have to tell you that, much like that original Chicago policy, it goes outside the Supreme Court. All these stringent requirements on law, a lot of unnecessary stuff. And Tim, who's a chief there in a small town, goes, listen, this may be applicable for Cleveland, right? But this is not applicable to me. We have a good sound policy. We've been operating well with it. It's within the guidelines of the law. So I'm not going to comply with that. Well, I don't have to tell you, and I don't know the details, but that wasn't real popular for him to do. It's pretty courageous to stand up against that. But let me tell you who's going to be appreciative of that. His officers. And from what I understand, he's the only chief in the entire state of Ohio that said, not for me, and he has got a really good policy. He's got really good training, and that's exactly what he stood on. I'm going to answer some of your questions here. Actually, I might not be able to answer too many of them, but let's get to at least one of them. So give me just a second here to sort these out. I've got one question. I'm not going to name the name here, but he's a high-level trainer. He has done a really good job of logging training on different skill sets, tactics, fitness, shooting, combat. And thank you, sir, for being here with us today. And because of his logging process and detail, some of his officers are concerned that that could be exposed in a legal court, and they're not comfortable with the performances being reported. Just a few people, some from his management team, and he wants to know, how do I convince them of the necessity of keeping a detailed record? How do I address the legality aspect? Well, I'll tell you right now, I can't address the legality aspect. You're going to have to go to your own department's attorneys or community attorneys for that. I can't address that. But I can tell you that if you don't document training, training didn't happen. End of story. You've got to document training. We're doing so much training. We're doing so many community events in American law enforcement. We don't document it. Boy, I tell you what, one of the things I love to do is I used to go to some community meetings in one of my particular assignments, and I would always get a typical story. Well, you're not doing enough training, and you're not doing enough community policing. And I'd pull out my old Excel sheet because I would document it. I'd say, oh, really? It just happens that the officers under my command have gotten, I think it's one particular year, they were getting on average 10 times the amount of training that other officers in the state had received, because we had done some internal training. And then we had done over 200 community events in a year. Well, that's almost one a day. Pretty big tally. And of course, I would also kind of follow up. I'd kind of gig a little bit. I'd say, and by the way, I didn't see any of you at these community events, right? Because they're in this little community meeting, wanted to shout out at law enforcement. And let me tell you what it did for me. It shut them up. It absolutely it's like kryptonite to Superman, right? Now, I'm not trying to be smart about it, but it is smart to document. Now, as far as documenting the actual scores, my philosophy is typically been, when I do training, is typically a pass-fail with a standard. But our firearms training documents scores. Some other training I'm involved with document scores. And so, like I said, I can't speak to that, but I will say this. Overall, hopefully I got the most of what you wanted me to answer. Documentation is the key. If you don't document it, it didn't happen. I know we say that as a cliche, but it's absolutely true. And today, more than ever, we should document everything. If you stop and shoot basketball with a kid, you just did a community event, right? We need to be documenting all these things. And by the way, I love playing basketball with kids and doing that kind of thing, but that's not really something that obviously we're better than that. We ought to be doing that, but we ought to be doing much, much more. We got to do more than throw the Facebook video online and go, hey, we're doing community policing. No. And by the way, stop with the community policing nonsense. It's been around for hundreds of years, right? Robert Peel was the first one who started talking about it. We do a really good job of the community policing aspect. We just don't do a good job of documenting and telling people about it. And let me tell you what community policing is. It's what I recently heard at some training I did up at Kansas, where the sheriff said we have the 10-minute rule. In fact, if you type law officer, type in 10-minute rule, I'll tell you what it is there in that article. But he said 10-minute rule means every time somebody goes to a call and they resolve the call, I make them stay 10 more minutes. I said, really? I said, what do you have them do? Just talk to them, find out about the family, meet people. It's a 10-minute rule. Pretty cool stuff. Now you're going to immediately go, we don't have time for that. You don't have time not to do that, okay? You don't have time not to do that. And that, by the way, is community policing. So we don't have to be real fancy. Don't spend millions of dollars. That's just one aspect of it, the 10-minute rule. I can't get to any more questions. I'll try to get them to you offline. I really apologize for that. We obviously are running a little stretched for time, and we're going to power through here and get here to the end. One of our sponsors is, of course, Telogis, Ford Telematics. I love this product because for the first time when it comes to vehicle-related activities of law enforcement, by the way, the leading cause of death and injury. So we talk about officer safety. You've got to talk about this. I believe it's the leading cause because we pretty much haven't talked about it. But this, for the first time, we can be proactive, not reactive, right? We typically wait for an officer wrecks or gets hurt and go, hey, what are we doing wrong here? But these telematics kind of enable us to sort of see behaviors and patterns before something gets bad. Now, people automatically go, oh, it's Big Brother, it's Big Brother. Well, I guess if you see it that way, but if you're a true leader, you don't use this as Big Brother. You use this as a officer safety tool, right? And so hopefully we're not using this as we're trying to get somebody in trouble. We do too much of that as it is. We use this to help people, and that's what all of our safety should be. Warrior versus guardian. Well, I love this question. Some of you had this question to me earlier. Are we warriors or are we guardians? I love it when I'm asked the question because here's my answer. Are you warriors or are you guardians? Here's my answer. Yes. Yes. You better be both, right? You better be both. In fact, I love to think that we recruit guardians and we train you to be warriors. In recent years, we have been very scared of this warrior concept. Oh my goodness, we don't want to be warriors. Well, let me tell you something. When the gunfire is going off in that elementary school, or the Pulse nightclub, or Las Vegas Mandalay Bay, you better have a bunch of warriors on your department, right? That's just the end of story. It's not the majority of what we do, but you better be ready and you better be prepared. And I'm sick and tired of leaders shying away from this. And I actually said I wasn't going to name any names today, but there's just one quick quote where, bad mouthing the warrior mindset. I heard a chief recently. He says, we're going to stop recruiting these warriors like it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, right? It doesn't mean you're going out and you're targeting people and brutalizing people. It means you're prepared to protect people. And so I throw this in there just to kind of encourage you to stop shying away from that. Don't be scared of that, right? That's who we are. That's who we are. It better be who we are. Now, granted, 99% of our job is guarding, but there's going to be that time when it's just you and evil, and it better be you that wins every single time. A few quick slides on training. We're going to get you out of here. Man, I appreciate you so much for still being here. It's really unbelievable to me that many of you have stuck around because I know how webinars are, and so that's encouraging to me. And so hopefully we've been able to give you something to really swallow on. And I love what Chief Jeff Chevlin said here. Many of you are familiar with Jeff. He's now retired. Any police chief that wins the National Tactical Rifle competition is a chief I want on my side. And I love it what he said. He says, too often we find the chiefs, administrators don't even know what recruits are being taught. They don't know anything, but they stand in judgment. Man, that he nails it. He absolutely nails it. I can't tell you how many people are judging our officers when it comes to tactics or tasers or you name it, and they don't even do any of it, right? They haven't been to a class in that in forever. So I think we've got to be better, and we've got to understand to prepare our leaders for reality. That's what we're trying to do here at the Courageous Leadership Institute. A couple of things that we're trying to do here is we will certify your agency as a courageous agency. If your policies conform to what we advocate, your training conforms to what we advocate. If your policies don't, we can help you write those. We can help you write policing plans. We want to be the one-stop shop to help your agency be the best it could possibly be. We really have got to stop listening to people that don't know a lot about law enforcement, really don't know anything about law enforcement. Everything's too emotional. It's putting the lives of our officers at risk. The time for that has to stop. Now, I'm not saying we ignore our community. I've already given you one way we can get our community involved, but we can't let them be the only decision maker because you are indeed the experts. Another one of our sponsors is Below 100. You can find them at below100.com or below100.org. And we're real proud here. As you well know, I'm the editor-in-chief of lawofficer.com and Law Officer Magazine. And we launched this back in 2010. You'll see our emblem there below. And I'm really proud of what they've been able to do. They're now off on their own as a sole nonprofit. But essentially what this training provides, you can contact them for that training, is you'll see the tenets they teach. And they provide the low-hanging fruit. This is the stuff that we can control. I used to run around the country and say, we really can't control the crazy guy that's going to ambush us, but we can control this. The truth is we can control almost everything. We can't get into that today, but yes, we can control. We are our first 3 seconds ambush class. We do control that ambush, and we are going to control, and we are going to live. We are going to survive. But I want to get past what Below 100 talks about, because Below 100 is talking about things we ought to be doing. There should be no more classes on wearing our seatbelt, wearing our vest, and going appropriate speed. Those classes really need to come to an end because we need to be all complying with that stuff. But the fact is that those classes aren't coming to the end tells me we're still kind of messing up. And so I think as leaders, we need to embrace all sorts of training. This is sort of the concrete, the umbrella of the training. You've got to get this first when you go into more advanced stuff. But I think there needs to come a time where our leadership is so good in this profession to where we get past this stuff, okay? Because we are better than this. us dying because of our own, negligence, us dying because we're not using basic safety equipment like seat belts or ballistic vests, things like that. That's got to come to an end, because trust me, there is a dangerous element out there, the evil that preys on you. And when you hunt the devil, that's a dangerous occupation. I want you to focus 100% on that. So I think it's time we get past it. This program's been going for 6 or 7 years now. I think it's a great program. I highly encourage you to go to the website. If you haven't been to training, get to the training, expose your department to the training. But at some point, we need to get this. I'm always amazed at these departments that do this training every year. At what point do you not just go, listen, if you don't do this, you're going to be disciplined? I mean, seriously, if you're not wearing your seatbelt, you're doing these unsafe things, we've got to stop this. And so I love what they're doing. I love that Loss is a part of that. Great people involved in that. I can't speak highly enough about that, but I cannot emphasize enough that if you're still having problems in this area, expose your officers to the training, and then if they still don't do it, you need to take it to the next step, whatever that step is, for the sake of their lives, okay? For the sake of their lives. It's that simple. Because if they continue down this road just violating these tenets, somewhat tragedy will occur, and we cannot have that. I talked about this earlier. Yeah, that doesn't need to be your plan. I threw it in there just to kind of laugh about it. Because you're going to do everything right. You're going to still be on YouTube or video, whatever. That's just the name of the game. I embrace video. So should you, because law enforcement is one of the finest professions out there. And our problem is we don't give good context to the video, right? We let everybody else give context to it. But I'll put law enforcement up against anybody. I love it. Everybody's people running around going, we need body cameras on every cop. We need body. Fine, but what about you? I mean, what about other professions? I mean, trust me. I don't think there's any profession that could be as successful as law enforcement wearing a body camera. Seriously, think about it. School teachers, preachers, doctors, lawyers, put body camera on any other profession, any other respected profession. We look pretty good. So I don't diminish the fact that we've got to always improve. That's part of leadership. We've got to always be better. But I will put our men and women against anybody. I think when you train, you got to have an all-encompassing approach. We do a full-day seminar at Safe Tech Training called the 360, Mindset 360, where we kind of look at all aspects of it. We got a lot of great classes out there that only focus on certain aspects, but I want to focus on everything that's hurting us. Some departments do a good job at violent potential ambush. Some departments do a good job on driving. Some departments do a good job on wellness. You as a leader have got to ensure that your officers are getting everything they need. We call it the 360 approach here at the Institute, everything. And these are the top three. These have been the top three for as long as anybody can remember: roadways, violent attacks, and heart attacks. And as I speak in 2017, that's the exact order it is in. And so I think our training has to revolve around that. If you need some help in that, be sure to contact us offline. We'll do all we can to help you. I love what this says. Let's stop doing the best practices and let's do the next practices. Because the truth is, we should be the kingdom of our domain. We should be, instead of us waiting for somebody else to tell us how to do it, we should be looking for the best ways to do things. And that top quote is by myself. Man, I believe that wholeheartedly. I believe we are stuck in status quo. Our leadership's stuck in status quo. It's time to push for greatness. And by the way, if you're still with us, I think that really starts with you. It does. I mean, if you're like some of us out there, it's almost like it's an impossible task to become great. But I believe in it. I believe that everything starts with leadership. Probably 5 years ago, I would have never thought I'd be speaking about leadership. But as I'm in sort of the twilight of my career, I am seeing that this is everything. If we can improve leadership in law enforcement, everything else gets better. So we have to do it. Now, if you're in our full-day seminar, I'm going to end with this, and we're going to be done. I can't thank you enough for everything. We leave you with a series of principles that we advocate. I'm only going to give you a couple today. Obviously, we haven't had time to really speak on a lot of subjects that our full-day Courageous Leadership class speaks on, but here's one of them, and we alluded to it today. The courageous leaders will develop use of force policy based on the United States Supreme Court language. That sounds simple. That sounds, well, of course, that's how you develop policy. But unfortunately, we're seeing policy after policy that is not conform with this, and it goes outside of this. So we've got to get back to this, get back to the basics, so to speak. Here's the next principle. Courageous leaders will train their personnel with an emphasis on various officer survival tactics on a regular basis and well beyond the minimum standard. We alluded to that earlier. Your training cannot be just centered on one certain thing. You've got to have a holistic approach, so to speak, to that training, and we highly emphasize that. We didn't really get into talk about wellness today. It's obviously a huge topic when we talk to law enforcement around the country, but I think leaders need to really take a serious look at this. Maybe you're doing it well, maybe you're not. Everything from peer-to-peer to training to stress management. I think we're living in sort of a great day and age in law enforcement. We're sort of paying attention to this now. We all know that the troubling statistic that more police officers are killed with their own guns, i.e. suicide, than a bad guy's gun. And I think we're all kind of keen to wary of that. I don't think we're quite where we need to be. And so it's going to take some courage to really stand up and do that. And as I come to a close today, I want you to think back to Monty Morris and think about your own legacy. That's really what leadership's about. What are you going to leave this profession better than you found it, right? I think many of us get in this rut where we just go to work, we do our job, we come home. At the end of the day, you're going to get to the end of this profession. And let me tell you, if someone that's kind of getting near the end, and 24 years in, a few years left, it goes by pretty quick. Are you going to get to the end, and are you going to know that you did everything you could to leave that legacy, no matter what that is? Maybe you're a police chief, or maybe you're just someone influencing, younger officers. Maybe you're an FTO. Whatever that legacy is, are you going to leave it all on the line? And I just want to encourage you. I know we've been beat up in the last few years. We've had some coward leadership sort of enable that. We're coming back from that. That is changing. And we're going to do everything we can. I will spend my last breath on this earth making sure of it. And we want you to be involved in this. And here's a poster that hangs up in my offices for my officers, and because we try to encourage this, and it is good is the enemy of great. I said we're pretty good earlier. I said this profession is good. And you are pretty good. Probably your department's pretty good. Maybe your leadership's pretty good, although half of you said it wasn't. But what is it going to take for greatness, right? Greatness is where we need to go, and greatness is where we should be. And that's going to take work, and it's going to take courage. But let me give you some great news. You probably knew this, or maybe you didn't because it wasn't well publicized. They've been doing these Gallup studies on the most respected professions since the 60s. Law enforcement last year, the last time they did the study, was an all-time high for respected professions. You see, when you listen to the news media, that's not what you get, right? When you go to your Facebook page, it's not what you get. But to the American people, you are highly respected. And you need to embrace that. Now is the time to live for greatness. Now is the time to stand up and be a courageous leader. Now is the time. Let's not waste another minute. Time is too short. Your officers matter too much. And if there's anything that I can do, let me know. I'm going to give you a minute to write my email down. I'm going to send everybody a follow-up email in the next couple of days, just sort of give you some links we talked about, give you my contact page, give you the contact if you wanted to maybe bring this full-day seminar into your area. We'd love to do that. If you want to know more about the Courageous Leadership Institute, we would love to talk to you about that. Be sure to check that site out and let us know if you have any questions. We are really excited you joined us today. We're really humbled of our sponsors that enabled this to happen, Telogis and Below 100. We couldn't do it without them, so we're very grateful. But more importantly, we're grateful for you. Live for greatness, be great, be that courageous leader, and let us know if we can do anything for you. God bless.